Meet Mariya Yarotska, the powerhouse behind most of Europe's ambitious innovation programs. She's onboarded over 8,000 developers into Near Protocol and mentored women entrepreneurs with Garage 48. She is building future with Hackbox, and if your company wants to host a hackathon, she is the right person to go with.
Well, hi, Maria. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me today and talk a little bit about you and what you do in Web3 and maybe Web2 as well. Tell us a little bit more about hackathons, your event management, your company. I'm super excited to talk to you today.
Equally excited. I'm super excited to talk about Hackbox and hackathons and builders and Web3 and beyond. So ask away.
Amazing. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about Hackbox, what it is and how did it start? Why did you come up with this company?
So I've been doing hackathons since 2016, I think. I started as a NASA Space Apps host. It's a NASA incubation program for space tech startups. At first, it was a volunteer job for me because I just wanted to try what it is, how it looks like, how to host a hackathon. And when I hosted my first hackathon, I just fell in love with the process. I really like to see the project grow. I like to see the ideas come to life, people teaming up, building stuff. And I decided that I want to make it my main job. 2021, I hosted my first hackathon on blockchain, and it was like a big bang debut with thousands of developers. And then I worked with several blockchain ecosystems, and what I saw, like there was a pattern because a lot of events in Web3 are community driven. It's not really streamlined up to like a unified standard. And what I wanted to create is out of the box plug and play solution for people who want to host a hackathon from Nigeria to Greenland. They would just open the box, they would receive certain guidelines and templates, and they would use it to host an awesome event. So we started that at Near Ecosystem. At some point in time last year, we spun out and started working beyond Near Ecosystem and beyond Web3 ecosystem. And this is how Hackbox came to life.
Amazing. So do you work only on Web3 hackathons today? You said you go beyond. Do you mean Web2 as well or Web3 focused?
I wouldn't pigeonhole it as a Web2. I work with certain industries and certain ecosystems. So last year in November, we hosted a Cassini hackathon. It's a hackathon sponsored by European Commission. And this particular issue was dedicated to space technology and defense. Then this summer, I partnered up with Enablers School and we went to Armenia where they host this annual event, like grand event, pop-up village, advanced startup summit with thousands of people living in tents. And we hosted the first ever pre-incubation track for students. We wanted to deploy a hackathon-like environment in the forest without internet, without laptops, like hardcore prototyping. So it was super interesting.
Why did you even do that? Was it like Starlink or?
They had some internet connection, but what we wanted to do, we wanted people to do field research, because if you work at a festival at this scale, this is what you actually do. You go and talk to people, make observations, you test hypotheses, and yeah, this is how it's done.
From product management standpoint, actually, it's a really cool example because I think on the tech side, engineers oftentimes focus on the technology and the solutions. Seeing you giving examples of how you are working on the field, interview potential users, that's definitely really helpful to identify that the product is needed.
Web3 is really heavy on engineer founders. A broader scale of venture ecosystem, you will see that usually a technical founder pairs up with a less technical founder to make sure that their talents and strong suits kind of complement each other. So this is what we see at hackathons. Also, I always say that hackathon is a developer-focused event, but at the end of the day, 20% of people who come build at hackathon are not developers. They come there to do market research, to do pitch decks, to interview people, to do design. And without those people, you cannot really deploy products. You can probably deploy like scripts or deep tech things or bug bounty, but products are not built without non-developer people.
That makes sense. So speaking of that, when it comes to hackathons, a lot of times they're pretty short. I've seen situations where people are kind of prepped before the hackathon happens. Overall, what have you seen that usually is a pattern of success when it comes to a hackathon? Either it's the team itself, the right people, or the product itself, the combination. What are the ingredients to be successful at a hackathon, which is short period of time?
I think hackathon is basically life in a nutshell, right? So not the best developer, not the most talented builder always wins. It's always the best project manager. People who plan out their work, who are not afraid to trust and delegate, who scope out the work realistically enough, they would win this short period of builder time. Just because if you come in at a hackathon and you want to build like a perfect prototype that will have all the features,
In 2 days.
most likely this kind of teams, and by the way, that would be like a solo builder. That would be like I can with AI, I can definitely do it. They are destined to
Cursor,
fail,
done.
unfortunately, yeah, because to win a hackathon, you need to have a laser focus on key features that would matter to build an MVP, a minimum viable prototype, for the judges to see what you actually wanted to do. And also, a colleague of mine is always saying, "Get married to the problem. Get married to the problem." So a lot of times we see how people build those projects at hackathons that solve actually no one's problems. It's just
you're
just
so
play with technology. Yeah,
you're so interested in the solution that you came up with.
I created an NFT marketplace for meme coins. Good for you, but what problem does it solve? Most importantly, if it's not you and your friends. So if people give a second thought to that particular question, I think they have way better chances to win.
Yeah, when it comes to product, the rules apply the same way for both Web 2, Web 3, and whatever the web is coming next, right? When it comes to Web 3, what are the challenges that you see that might be harder than before you came to blockchain projects?
Okay, from our standpoint, we see a huge community, vibrant, diverse. If you compare this community to a community around every other technology, you would see that we're just a small solar system in a huge galaxy, so to say. So I think the problem is that people tend to work inwards. So they tend to solve the problems that they see in the ecosystem, governance, for example, and they don't really think about how people would even understand this outside of Web3 bubble. And what happens, instead of mass adoption, we become less and less approachable as a community, because maybe a couple of years ago it was even easier to explain what blockchain is. How can your grandma use it in real life? Nowadays, we have those use cases when grandmas use blockchain, but then we talk about decentralized artificial intelligence. We talk about decentralized financial instruments, and people didn't even grasp like the top level of this narrative. So what happens is this is like collapsing on the inside a little bit, idea-wise. And I think in terms of challenges that builders face, it's the challenge of narrative, in my opinion, is the strongest.
Wow, that is an interesting point. Well, it's actually a good point you mentioned about grandma, because I've been trying to explain to my mom what blockchain is, like little by little, and I think she's getting it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what product is built on, as long as, you know, the person finds the use and it's not too complicated, right? So for her, for example, when she sees wallet versus, you know, logging with Google, it's not too scary as long as I show her how to have a wallet, right? Because like this is a new concept, and so some of those things I know they're improving and getting more simplified, and maybe that audience doesn't need to know everything behind the scene, because frankly they don't even know how the Web 2 works, and it's okay.
It's a super interesting document released in the US a couple of months ago about blockchain and national defense and security. I suggest everyone who works on blockchain just read it for context, because what we're working with unbanked populations, for example, in the African continent and in the South American countries, where the hyperinflation makes people go out there. People age like yours and mine, moms and grandmas, they would find out what a USDC is, just because otherwise their pensions and salaries would just become like 10% lighter the next day. So they are kind of forced to use
They're forced, yes.
Blockchain is a lifeline for them. And then in the US, what I'm facing when I'm talking to people, like, what do you think about blockchain? They would say that's probably like a tool for investment. Or on the other hand, it's a tool for national security, because blockchain is used in sanctioned countries to overcome the sanctions and, for example, to find really, really bad stuff like terrorism. So it's like two very, very, very polar things. On one hand, we have like a bunch of grandmas who are just trying to get by, and on the other hand, we have governments who are trying to care about the safety and security of their people. So the blockchain is a spectrum, and it's not that easy to approach it.
Well, that probably means that, we're moving forward where it's taking every aspect of life, and the grandmas need it. That means it solves their problem. So we're finding more and more use cases, which is a great thing. So when it comes to you, let's switch a little bit more to you and Hackbox. And I don't even know how many companies there are, but when it comes to you and your customers, do you choose specific niche, or are you open to be working with everybody who is in Web3? How do you categorize if this is your customer or not?
Look, when I first started working in blockchain, I kind of faked it till I made it in terms of knowledge. Like they said words like escrow contract, liquidity, and like, yeah, escrow contract. I know exactly what it is. Like, okay, Google. That was
Now it's ChatGPT or something else.
per day. And then I realized it took me like over a year to feel really comfortable to even hold this like
Conversation.
at the technical level, but pedestrian level conversation about blockchain. So I wish I could work with more industries, but right now I specialize in three particular topics, which is blockchain, AI, and space tech. And I wasted a lot of years just trying to really be smart around it, not being smart around it. So if for example, like a pharmaceutical company approached me tomorrow and asked me to host a hackathon for them, I would most likely refuse, because to host a quite quality builder focused event, you need to understand what people are doing. And you cannot do that overnight.
So I am very passionate about AI in a way where I feel like AI is actually helping Web3 move forward. And again, I don't really care Web2, Web3. What I do care is I would love my content to be mine. I would love not to depend on, OpenAI and a few other companies. And yet here we are, right? And so this is the reason why I'm, investing my time and like research into Web3, into different companies and layer ones that already do anything or something with AI, because in my understanding, I mean, they move forward faster. So when it comes to these different companies, I only know a few, and again, I'm not like fully involved in Web3. Other than Near and a couple of other companies, how many do you see that, again, like you were mentioning about AI, do you see a lot of companies kind of diving into AI today in Web3?
Look, founders go where money leads them. And right now, if you're making an investor pitch and your pitch doesn't have this
AI
buzzword, you probably won't get any funding, right? So they are kind of forced to look into that direction, and many of them are working actually in stealth mode because of a lot of technologies like that. They really require some time to
especially if they're building it on their own and not using something that is existing, which is the case usually.
Yeah, but then if you look at the AI industry as a whole, the race is not between near, not near, and that sort of company. The race is between the nations. So right now it's a question of national defense. Who's gonna win this race? Who's gonna develop the first general artificial intelligence, right? Would it be China? Would it be US? Would it be India? Would it be someone else? And then a lot of founders, what they would see is that the product that they want to develop, they lack resources as a private company. They need more research. And it's been some time since private companies hired whole divisions of researchers. Now we have to do that as AI companies. And a lot of companies are striving to go that way. It's just the entrance barrier is becoming higher and higher. And I think the window of opportunity for a lot of teams is unfortunately closing, because the entrance fee would become just too expensive for one founder and their team to handle.
Okay, you raised one more point that I wanted to ask about actually. So just recently, I think it was yesterday, I was reading about the power grid and point when it comes to the, fight, this AI war between the US and China. China already won in that aspect because they always have extra 80% to 100% of energy versus in the US, you have 10 to 15%. And I know that when it comes to Europe, let's say France, Germany, there are several countries that are really good at being eco-friendly and focusing on saving power, but it's usually like alternative, right? And so we have some constraints with oil and such. At the same time, there is also concerns about AI when it comes to Europe. So when these companies are located in Europe and trying to grow in Europe and they're in AI, what do you see today? Are they like moving to either Asia or the US? Are they being successful in Europe? What are the patterns that you see?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that scale, but if you look at the innovation ecosystem in Europe, Europe has consistently delivered solutions that require years and years of research, because what Europe does best is regulate. Innovation doesn't exactly thrive in a highly regulated environment, but what does is actually great thinkers and ideas that take some time to brew. I would say, like, if we would profile the countries who would do what in this global ecosystem of AI, I would say that's what Europe would drive forward is actually research, because if you look at French or German, for example, LLM ecosystem, they would be training LLMs in different languages, and they would be using approaches that, for example, no one in the world uses, just because they get to invent it from scratch. So this is where innovation would happen. And in Europe, I see this trend that builders are, they tend to be focused on real world problems, on partnerships. For example, a couple of years ago, I hosted a hackathon in Vienna during the Vienna Startup Week. And the main partner of that hackathon was an energy company who was curious about blockchain and how blockchain can be used to build better decentralized power grids. Yeah. Unlike in the US, where we would self-serve the blockchain ecosystem with NFT marketplaces for meme coins, sorry for repeating myself. In Europe, they would be actively looking for real world use cases, public-private partnership. How can it actually make the world more accessible and better?
Yeah, solving actual problems, not just making money. I gotcha. So one more thing that you talked about that you mentioned that is really interesting, yet I know very little about, is space and your customers for space industry. Is it mostly, if you can answer, and if not, that's okay too, is it mostly the US, or do you also have customers in Europe that are from space industry?
Right now, I'm mostly focusing on Europe. I'm working as a mentor on a couple of programs for startups who work in that direction. I'm trying to partner up with players inside of Ukraine who are building this dual use and defense ecosystem, and space would play a key role in that strategy. So I'm focusing on Europe just because for me it's also like a matter of my own interests. I want this ecosystem to be balanced, because what I'm seeing right now, the race is driving the progress forward. Who puts the base on the moon first? Yes, of course it's important, but also what's important is, for example, freedom of speech on occupied territories of Ukraine, which right now today can only be enabled by space connectivity.
Yes.
And I would like to work on that direction, and I would rather spend my time on solving real world problems of regular people than put a base on the moon. Although it absolutely sounds ambitious, it's a dream, but this is probably not the first priority for my part of the world right now.
Yes, you choose what you focus on with the amount of time that you have. That makes total sense and very admirable. So thank you so much for sharing these notes. And when it comes to, contacting you and finding you for companies who want to host hackathons, how should they do that? How do they contact you and Hackbox?
Well, we have a catch-all form on hackbox.co, but what usually people do, they find me on LinkedIn, they find me on Telegram, simply because people don't really understand what a hackathon is. So they heard it somewhere, they want to host it, and then they would be looking for mentorship first. They would be looking for advice. How do you make it happen? And I'm always up for giving some advice. is if and whether or not it will end up in a signed contract. I want people to host more hackathons, because I think even if it's an internal one, it's a great instrument to get the brain juices flow to solve certain problems in a very short period of time. For universities, for example, it's also a great instrument. So I would always answer the questions that come from that direction. So what happens in here is, it's not like my client, a potential client, already knows what kind of products they want to purchase. They know what kind of person might potentially solve this problem. So they would come to me, or they would come to my co-founder, and they would ask questions like, will a hackathon help solve this problem? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes, and this is how we move forward.
That is a great point that you've brought up, because me coming from a lot of years in corporate, when I think hackathon, okay, we have a structure, right? Like there is a goal, and the hackathon either helps solve that problem or it doesn't. So you don't host the hackathon. And as you said, there's internal ones that could be hosted for the company, external ones, and different goals bring different type of an event. Before a person, maybe you can give us just like a little gift of advice. Before a company, small or large, thinks about hackathon, what questions should they answer to themselves first and then reach out to you?
If it's an internal hackathon, I think I would also always make this suggestion to watch the videos about the Redbox program that Adobe has deployed a few years ago. It became world famous. Every employee who wanted to become an entrepreneur, which is like internal entrepreneur, they would receive a box with a bunch of resources. There would be an open credit card with 10K, no obligations, no strings attached. They would be a Starbucks card, as far as I'm concerned, just for unlimited
Gotta have some coffee.
Some mentorship hours with top executives of the company where you want to deploy your solution. And most importantly, some free time that you can dedicate to the project. So the company needs to answer themselves the question, so are we actually ready to support internal entrepreneurs, or do we see them as a threat? As when a person spends a couple of hours of their paid working time working on something completely different that doesn't contribute towards the North Stars and KPIs and OKRs, and potentially that person can actually spin out if they build something marketable and profitable.
Right.
Are we afraid of that person, or are we ready to support that person and embrace them with open arms? That's the key question before you go into the hackathon.
Yeah, those are great questions that I remember when I was working at T-Mobile that we always asked. That's a good example.
Right?
Yeah, of course. And frankly, because we had the open source community within that organization, with that company, I remember there's like over 20 projects that came out within 2 years that were open source. And so you have these versions that are free for others, and some new companies came out of it. And eventually, frankly, that whole program got closed. Wasn't invested in anymore. So anyway, pluses or minuses, every company has to decide if hackathon is going to be the solution for their goals. Thank you so much for sharing this information with us. And I'd like for those who want to build with Mariya to reach out to her.